everyone, welcome to Mindful Mindsets. Today we're going to start with a bit of an exercise, and I want you to think of a time when you had a major dispute with somebody. Maybe it was your spouse, maybe it was your partner, maybe it was a company, just whatever it was. Hopefully it lasted more than a day, and it was something that you felt very passionate about. Something where you thought there was a sense of injustice, something that you were fighting, and something that subsequently you have been spending a great deal of energy justifying why you were right and why they were wrong. So we do this a lot, but I want you to bring to mind a very clear image in your head of a time when you were right, you know you were right, you're very angry at a sense of injustice, and you've been spending a great deal of time or energy justifying why you were right in that scenario. So, to illustrate a point, I'm going to tell a story about Ajahn Brahm. I've talked about Ajahn Brahm in this channel before. He's a monk in Australia, a monk that I very much love, and he was trained in Thailand. So in the Thai forest tradition, it's kind of complicated, but essentially you have to be ordained by somebody who is a monk or a nun to become a monk or a nun. It's supposed to be a lineage that you can trace all the way back to the Buddha. So hypothetically, if you're a monk in this tradition, you were ordained by someone who was ordained by someone who was ordained by someone all the way back to the Buddha. Now the Buddha ordained both men and women, but somewhere along the way they decided that only women could ordain women and only men could ordain men. So about 1,000 years ago, the women's lineage died out, so there could be no more nuns, at least that were equal to monks. So there's some complicated thing where there are nuns, but in any event, the nuns are not looked at as equal to the monks. They're not as senior. And Ajahn Brahm decided in Australia that there was no reason for this to be the case. He read up on it, he consulted with his fellow monks, and they decided there was absolutely no reason in this Buddhist tradition why men could not ordain women. Right? The Buddha was a man, he ordained women, so there's no reason whatsoever that they couldn't ordain women. The women would be called bhikkhunis, and there was no reason for the bhikkhunis not to be as senior as the monks, not to be equal to them. So he did a ceremony where he ordained 4 full Buddhist nuns in the Thai forest tradition, in Australia of course, but in the Thai forest tradition that elevated them to the same status as the male monks. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably think that this was a great thing to do, a great thing for gender equality, and a great thing for Buddhism. The monks in the Thai forest tradition in Thailand, in Bangkok, did not agree. They thought that it was against tradition, they thought that it broke a bunch of rules, and they had a very tense meeting with him where members of his Australian monastery went with him to Thailand. They had tense disagreements about the law of Buddhism and complicated legal Buddhist matters, and ultimately essentially excommunicated him from the Thai forest tradition. He is no longer considered by those monks to be a member of their tradition. Now, when I hear this, it's easy for me to say, well, screw those monks in Thailand, they don't know what they're talking about, right? To me, their thinking is totally backwards. It has nothing to do with the Buddhism that I love, of compassion and kindness and seeing things in a mindful way, right? Not having strict rules for things, but understanding compassion and kindness is the most important thing and living up to those values rather than living up to some arbitrary rules that you have set up. So it's very easy for me and probably for you to say, well, who cares about those monks in Thailand? They're a bunch of idiots. But for Ajahn Brahm, this was a place where he grew up. This was where he was trained. This was where he learned things like opening the door of your heart, right? This was the first 10 years of him being a monk. His teacher, who was very famous, who died 20 years ago, so wasn't a part of this, his teacher was one of the most impactful people in that tradition. His teacher, Ajahn Chah, is somebody he looked up to and he loved, and that he associates with that monastery. So of course he's going to have much more ambivalent feelings than you or I would about just dismissing that monastery and saying, well, who cares about those guys? And it was a very throwaway line in one of his talks where he said, did I do the right thing with the bikinis? And in that situation, I would have spent a great deal of energy justifying why I was right. I would say, of course I did the right thing. They don't know what they're talking about. This is for equality. This is great. But he said something totally different. He said, did I do the right thing with the bikinis? I don't know. And then he went on with his talk. And I thought that this was such a powerful message. It wasn't even an intentional message that he made, but it was so powerful to me because I realized that so often I'm so consumed with justifying why I'm right, justifying why I did something, and not even to other people, just to myself, justifying why I was right, why the other person was wrong, and why I should have done what I did. But here was a man who I respected, who was powerful, who did something that I absolutely thought was right, and he just said, I don't know. And I realized that it saves us so much energy if we can have that attitude. If we can say, yeah, I don't know if I did the right thing there. That saves us from having to justify our actions to ourselves, and it saves us from so much fake arguments in our own head and so much pain. But more importantly, it signals to us unconditional self-acceptance. Unconditional self-acceptance. Because when we're justifying so strongly to ourselves, whether we realize it or not, our actions, we are presupposing that we're not okay unless what we did was right. We're sort of signaling subconsciously that we're not going to accept ourselves unless what we did in the past was right. And this is saying, no matter what, you don't have to worry about whether or not what you did was right because I accept you anyway. This frees us up to do so many more things. We're less concerned about making mistakes if we know that we have that unconditional self-acceptance. If we have that though faith that we talked about in our Martin Luther King video, where no matter what, though you did something wrong, though you may have screwed up, you still have self-acceptance. And I actually think sometimes it's harder to accept ourselves when we really don't know if what we did was right or wrong. When we know what we did was wrong, sometimes we just say, okay, well, I screwed up in that situation. I wasn't myself. I was angry. I was upset. I was tired. Whatever. We can explain why that happened, and we can accept that. When we really aren't sure, when it's really uncertain, that's when it can be the most difficult. And so what this attitude says is, we're okay with uncertainty. And we know that the world is so uncertain. We know that mindfulness is about embracing that uncertainty. So if we can say, I don't know, we don't have to say whether we were right or wrong. And that uncertainty, allowing that uncertainty to be, will make us so much more mindful and will give us so much acceptance. So I hope that you can adopt this attitude and just say, I don't know whether I was right or wrong, but I'm good enough anyway. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.